everyone. My name is Ashlyn. I'm a fitness and sports instructor with CFB Borden, and today I'm going to talk to you about injury prevention, and more specifically, I'm going to talk to you about the difference between flexibility and mobility, and how you can start to train the latter a little bit better. So we're going to discuss exactly that, the differences between the two. From there, I'm going to talk a little bit about the anatomy so that you get a better picture of what's going on, and then I'm going to show you some ways that you can start to train your mobility in your own workouts, just small little exercises or ways that you can add them into just a regular workout and really help to start train that. So what is the difference between flexibility and mobility? Well, you've probably heard both of those terms used rather synonymously in any of your PSP-led classes or any of the research that we've done. However, there is a very key difference between the two. So flexibility is being able to move through a range of motion that's probably a little bit increased than what maybe is your average. So somebody who can do the splits, for example, is flexible. Or for some people, somebody who can touch the toes could be considered flexible. The difference here between mobility is that mobility allows you to have that same range of motion or something close to it, but it also keeps integrity within the joints. So it's one thing to be able to do the splits. It's another thing to be able to have some sort of weight when you're going into the splits, or make sure that those joints are super strong if you were to have somebody accidentally knock you over when you're doing the splits, right? Like if you can just move through that range of motion, but you don't have the strength within your joints and your muscles to actually hold that position, then you're going to be at a really high risk of injury. Whereas if you have the stability and the integrity within your joints in those ranges of motion, then you're going to be much less likely to have any sort of injuries. So moving from mobility into hypermobility, it may be a term that you've heard before as well. So hypermobility is usually something that people are born with. It's a genetic, I don't want to say condition, it's not necessarily a disease, but it's a genetic predisposition that some people have more hypermobile joints than other people. And that's just natural, and it's just the way their body sits, and it's entirely normal and fine. However, people who are a little more hypermobile do need to be more careful when they're trying to train their flexibility or train their mobility or go into those ranges of motion that seem like they're easy, but if they don't do them properly, then they're going to add some sort of injury to themselves. So hypermobility is just a laxity in connective tissue. So all of the ligaments and the tendons, which we'll talk about a little later, that surround the joints in your shoulders and your knees and your hips, etc., those are relatively lax. They're not as strong as they should be. And so that person can go into a larger range of motion than usual. So you see this in people who have hyperextended knees, in people who can do weird things with their fingers. Similarly, so myself, I'm particularly hypermobile in my shoulders. That would look like one of my shoulders can sort of pop way out. This doesn't hurt. It's not challenging for me. It's just the way my body naturally falls. However, as a result, I do tend to have a lot of shoulder injuries, and I need to be super careful. So that would be hypermobility. It's mobility past what is normal, and it's not necessarily a good thing. So moving into the anatomy, we're going to first talk about ligaments and tendons. So ligaments and tendons are what hold your bones together, right? Because if you were to look at only a skeleton, the bones are not actually connected to one another in any way, shape, or form other than by those ligaments. It's not like the physical bone connects to another bone. So ligaments will connect bone to bone. So for example, you've probably heard the ACL or the MCL. Those are knee ligaments. They're just small little pieces of connective tissue that connect one bone to the next bone. A tendon also connects to a bone, but it connects from a muscle into a bone. So your bicep tendon is the tendon that connects from your bicep up into your shoulder to hold the bicep onto your shoulder and allow you to actually move your elbow and move your shoulder. Okay? They're all connective tissue, both ligaments and tendons. It's the same type of tissue. It's very hard, it's very durable, and it doesn't stretch the way muscle stretches. So going into short versus long muscles, I'm also going to talk about agonist muscles versus antagonist muscles. So it's very similar to what you would think of in a story with the protagonist and the antagonist. One is good, one is bad. Not necessarily that your muscles are good and bad, but The agonist muscle is on one side of your body, and the antagonist muscle is the muscle that does the exact opposite of the chosen agonist muscle. So if one muscle flexes, the other one has to extend. They're working in opposition of one another, and if you didn't have one working very well with the other, then you would have all sorts of weird things going on with your body. So it's really important that all of our muscles are working appropriately and the way they need to be. So how that translates into short versus long is that as we go through our daily life and we have our usual things that we do every day, sitting in the chair all day, for example, we tend to get certain muscles that stay really, really short and they don't want to lengthen because they're not used to. And then other muscles that get really, really long and they don't want to shorten and they don't want to work and they're very, very weak. So it's really important that we're aware of what's going on there and that we act appropriately. So, for example, some people feel like their hamstrings can never, ever, ever get loose. They try to touch their toes and they keep stretching and stretching and stretching and their hamstrings are always sore no matter what. Chances are, and now this is a generalization for sure, but chances are their hamstrings are actually really, really long and they're weak. And they feel like they've been stretched so far and that's why they're a little bit sore. Now I'm not talking about sore hamstrings after a hamstring workout. Okay, that's completely different. I'm just talking about standard, everyday, normal tightness in your hamstrings that seems to never go away. So if the hamstrings are really long, that means that the quadriceps are really, really short. It also may mean that the hip flexors are really short. So if you're always sitting in a chair, these hip flexors are always in a shortened position, right? They're always kind of sitting really, really short, and then as you try to stand, they're like, oh, I've never opened up before. I've been sitting all day long. And so they'll continue to hold you here, and you'll get really stuck in this position. And then your hamstrings and your glutes as well are going to be a lot longer and they're going to be weak and they don't know how to work because when you're sitting down in a chair, your hamstrings and your glutes are not working. So it's really important that you are not only working total body and working all of the muscles, but making sure that the muscles that tend to be long throughout your daily life are worked just a little bit more. And that's going to bring me into stop stretching, which I'm sure is something that you've probably never heard. Lots of people say, just stretch it out, just stretch it out, just stretch it out. If your muscle is tight, it's because you've stretched it pretty far and it's long, and then you're going to keep tugging on it and keep tugging on it and keep tugging on it, and it doesn't allow you to create that elasticity to kind of let it bounce back and find that contraction. So it just gets super, super lax and super, super lazy and super weak. And then you're not supported in that piece of your body. And so the antagonist muscles, to whichever one is super long, are going to be working overtime in order to support you. So if you can think about your lower back, for example, because that's something that people have a lot of pain in on average. If you were to continue to stretch out your lower back muscles and they started to lose that integrity, so now you no longer have support here. None of these muscles are helping support your back upright. So your core muscles, as well as many other muscles in this area, are holding you together for all that there's worth. And they're so short and they're so tight and they're so strong because they have to do all the work that these muscles aren't doing. And this leads to injury, right? Because they can only do so much. Eventually they can't go past what they're capable of, and you will find that you are injured if not already. So it's really important that rather than stretching your sore lower back, you start to activate it and get it working. Finding your neutral spine, so the natural curvature that your spine wants to stay in, and then creating a way of strengthening the muscles in that position, because that's what holds you upright. So that's what mobility is doing. It's creating flexibility or movement or space throughout your joints without compromising the integrity. So I'm going to go through now a couple of ways that you can start training that and just adding different things into the workouts that you already do to start to build that mobility within your joints. So stop stretching is number one. Quit with the stretching. It's not helpful. I know it feels good, and I get that every once in a while it's easy to sort of just put your heel out and kind of do a quick little hamstring stretch. I'm guilty of it too, but the 30-minute sessions of just sitting there really stretching out your muscles, trying to get them as long as possible, It's not helping you. I promise it's not doing anything. So we're going to discuss some ways that you can add into your workouts to help that. So let's start by slowing down. Okay? You're going to slow down your movements. Every once in a while, grab a workout and do something called time under tension. So really slowing down the workout, meaning that in a squat, for example, you're going to squat down 1, 2, 3, pause at the bottom for 1 or 2 seconds, and then 1, 2, 3, back up. Something like that. Why are we doing this? A couple of reasons. Time under tension is a great way to build strength. If you're looking for strength, that's a great way to do it, especially when you don't have a lot of weight, like right now during COVID. But it also allows you to go through the range of motion that you're actually capable of and not finding momentum going into a range of motion that you don't actually have the strength for. And then you can really be aware of your body and figure out where those pieces are that you're missing and how you can start to push that. So a good example of going through a slow range of motion and really testing your mobility and your actual limits is the squat and the infamous butt wink. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before, but it's basically when people go down into a squat and their hips want to sort of tuck underneath them, which means that you lose the stability in your pelvis and you're not actually creating any mobility there. Yes, it's great that you can move through that range of motion, but you're not creating integrity through those joints. You're putting them in a really compromised position. So if I were to go through a squat really fast and I go really slow or really low, then my hips are going to tuck underneath me, right? And I'm going to go super fast, and I'm probably not even going to realize that that's what's happening. However, if I go really, really slow, I keep my core engaged, and I wait until that point that my back wants to tuck underneath me, then I can stop at that position. Make sure that I'm still keeping integrity through my joints and stand tall, right? So slowing things down and starting to notice when your body is going through a range of motion that's not supported is a really good way of helping increase your mobility and make sure that you create the actual strength through those joints that you need. Another example is a lunge. So if I were to come into a lunge and come all the way down, and I may start to, for example, hike my hip or fall through this hip. So looking at it from a different angle. So some people sort of hike their hip out because they don't have the strength in that hip joint to be able to keep it there. So if I'm just going fast through them, I may never notice. But if I start tall and I go really slow, keep my core engaged, now I'm staying through that range of motion, but I'm super strong in this joint and the back joint, and I grow tall. So slowing things down is, yes, it'll create strength, but it'll also just create awareness of your body. Okay? So the second one is a weighted range of motion. So things like this, I don't have a weight with me, but an example of this would be holding a deep squat in the position that you can actually keep your spine neutral, holding the weight up at your chest, and just allowing yourself to sit here. So I'm not saying sit hunched over like a little gremlin. Actually grow tall, find the exact position that you need, and use the weight to sort of pull you down into that position. And don't give into the weight, don't sink into it. Now you're building strength for your joints to be able to hold this position. That's kind of similar to just doing a regular exercise but slowing it down. It's essentially the same thing. You can do some more flexibility, mobilization type exercises though, with light weight, moving really slowly again through those ranges of motion and just getting a feel for how you can hold different pieces with that weight rather than just falling into those positions, if that makes sense. Okay, and then lastly, I have some exercises that I think can really help. So I know I've demonstrated a couple, I'm going to go through a few more. So things like an overhead hold, so holding a kettlebell or a dumbbell or even a barbell up above your head, that's going to challenge your shoulder mobility. Even just holding it here or holding it and doing some walks, okay, that's already going to challenge your shoulder stability, but it's also in an increased range of motion because believe it or not, not everybody can get their hand right up over top of their shoulder. So if you're already there, great. So holding a weight up above your shoulder, holding a barbell or even just a dowel that doesn't have a lot of weight on it up above, and then starting to do some slow moving squats, right? So I'm not great at these with my shoulders, but you can notice if I don't have the mobility, I'm gonna fall with the weight here, right? But if I start to work on that mobility and move really slowly through the position, so maybe I just go half a squat and come up. And then as I get a little bit stronger in these shoulders, being able to hold this weight, I can start to move even deeper and come up. All right, so overhead stuff is really good for your mobility in the shoulders, as well as a little bit in the spine. A Bulgarian split squat is a good one as well, so similar to a lunge, except your back foot is going to be up, elevated on a bench or a chair. So what this does is, with your foot a little bit higher, you're now getting into that hip flexor, you're really stretching it out, but you're stretching it in a very active position. So you've lengthened a muscle that's typically short, because anybody who sits in a chair too long, their hip flexors are short. So you're starting to lengthen that muscle in a strong position. You're very, very active. Everything is working as you lengthen it out and bring it back up. So regular lunge or a Bulgarian split squat with your foot elevated, both are going to be really excellent for lengthening and strengthening the hip flexors. A reverse tabletop position is good for shoulders and hips. So hands are behind you, fingertips are pointed forward, feet are flat on the floor, knees a little bent. And you're going to press through your arms. So you may already find a bicep stretch here. Press through your arms and then raise your hips towards the sky. So I'm squeezing my bum and working with the backs of my legs. So my hamstrings and my glutes are working here. I'm not just pushing up and kind of hanging on my shoulders. I'm very, very active. Hands press in, feet push in, bum squeezes, backs of legs squeeze, and then my triceps are working really hard to stretch out my biceps, and my chest is opening up a little as well. So everything is super active as you do it. Another great one for the hip flexor, if a lunge or a Bulgarian split squat is maybe not going to work for you. So coming into, we call it a half kneeling position. So one knee's out, one knee's in front. Make sure that everything is lined up to start. So your head is right over shoulders, over hips, over knee. So we're not leaning forward, and we're also not arching our back, leaning backwards, because that's going to lead to a back injury. Front foot is flat on the floor, and that knee is about in line with your ankle. You can place your hands on your hips if you really want to get specific, and just make sure that they're not hiking to one side or the other, that they're very level. From here, you're going to push your knee into the floor, almost like you're trying to stand up. And then you're going to squeeze your bum and really push your hips forward without leaning forward. So knee drives down first, and then I squeeze the back of my leg, so I'm staying active, and I'm pushing my hips forward, and it doesn't look like I'm moving a lot, but I'm getting a ton of stretch through the front of my quads and into my hip flexor, and I'm really active right now. I'm not passively stretching, I'm actively stretching. And as you do that, you'll start to feel like you find some release without losing the integrity of that joint. Okay? The last one I have for you is going to be for your hamstrings. So you can lie down on the floor, and you can do a test when you do this. You can test how far you can touch the floor or touch your ankles or your knees or whatever. And then you can do this exercise and try it again and see if you've gotten any more length. So I'll switch legs here. So one leg is going to be straight out, and the other one is going to be bent towards the sky. I do want you to double check that your lower back has just a little space under the floor, or off the floor rather, because that creates a neutral spine, which is the ideal position for our vertebra. From there, can you flex the foot of the straight leg, reach the leg really long, almost like you're trying to kick the wall behind you. And then I want you to start to lift the leg towards the sky, and you're only going as far as you don't tuck your back onto the floor. Right? Because I can go super far if I tuck my tail and I lift my hips. But that's not the goal here. The goal here is to stay neutral, keep that joint in one position at the top, and move around the joint at the bottom of it. So my leg is going to lift and lower. What I'm doing here is I'm lengthening out the hamstring, and I'm shortening and strengthening, contracting the quad and the hip flexor. All right. So agonist muscle is the hamstring, antagonist muscles are the quadriceps and the hip flexor, and they're working just as hard to be able to lengthen out the back of the leg, rather than just trying to hang on that hamstring joint and just try to stretch it as much as possible passively. So those are a couple of really great exercises to help with your mobility. As a personal Pilates instructor, I think that Pilates is one of the best ways to improve your mobility. So if it's something that you've never tried before or never even heard of before, we have several classes on this channel that you can check out. I'm teaching the majority of them, and there's a couple other instructors as well that are teaching a few. So go and find the ones that you like. Most of them are all beginners. It's going to be a lot of core work, but it's also going to be a lot of mobility work. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to recap real quickly. So flexibility is the ability to move through a range of motion. Mobility is the ability to move through that same range of motion with integrity through the joints. Okay? We don't want to stretch. We want to shorten the long muscles, and we want to lengthen the short muscles, and we need to do this actively. So passive stretching would be hanging down, trying to touch your toes, and just staying there for 30 seconds, 5 times, or whatever it is. Active stretching would be where all of the muscles around the joint that you're trying to stretch or around the muscle you're trying to stretch are all working really hard. So some of them are working really long because those are the ones you're stretching. Some of them are working in contraction, and because those are the ones that are trying to hold you together while you lengthen out that other one. And then to train these, slow down your regular exercises, add some weight to some of your mobility exercises as long as you feel that you can actually control it. And then any of those exercises that I showed towards the end are going to really be helpful to add into your workouts. All right? I hope that you found this helpful. If you do have any continued questions, please leave them in the comment section below and let me know. If you're in Borden, you can shoot me a message on the D1. My name is Ashlyn Karosas. I'll put it in this video. And you can always reach out to me to ask more questions about this. Thank you so much for joining me today, guys. Bye.